First thing I want you to consider is why you should begin a play with the witches. What's the point? The play is called Macbeth, but we don't start with the main character. Have a little think about why that might be. What does that do to the atmosphere? What does it do to the message? When you're ready, unpause that, check the next slide for some key ideas. The biggest idea here is that Shakespeare establishes that the play is controlled by the witches. By opening the play with the witches, Shakespeare uses stagecraft to establish that the witches are more powerful than the main characters. The witches are in control. The witches are working for the devil to trap Macbeth. Notice the question mark. Some of these ideas are uncertain. We're not sure how they play out in the play. Perhaps that not everything in the play is what it seems. The witches seem to know the future. I now want you to write up your ideas. How does Shakespeare present ideas about witchcraft in Act 1, Scene 1? Remember, when we explode a quotation, the sort of things that are on the screen now are the kind of things that we look for. When you're composing paragraphs, you want three parts: what, how, and why. So some topic sentences you might use. Shakespeare presents witchcraft as, at the time the play was set, or Shakespeare's audience would. You should use all three if you're feeling particularly ambitious. Then in the middle you need to pick some key quotations and you need to analyse them. Use the key quotations we did in red or highlighted from the first scene. What message is Shakespeare conveying? This should be a short, sharp paragraph of maximum 5 sentences. Once you're done, unpause and on we go. I now want to recap Act 1, Scene 2. There are 4 key quotations on the screen. You should be able to go back over them in your notes and decide what it was that you thought about them first. If you pause the video here, I'll recap them after you unpause. Briefly, all's too weak for brave Macbeth. You ought to look at 2 things: the adjective brave, suggesting people respect Macbeth, and the idea that all, as in everyone on the battlefield, is too weak for him. They can't defeat him. Second, you should look at the verb unseamed and this metaphor of chopping a man in half, almost ripping him up like a piece of cloth. Does that suggest that Macbeth doesn't care about people in the same way you might expect someone to? However, you've got to remember it's a traitor he's killing, so at this point in the play, they seem to deserve it. Look at the noun execution in the line smoked with bloody execution. We know an execution is legitimate. Someone's given the authority to do that. The idea of his sword smoking suggests that it's physically hot, that the blood is evaporating off it because he's used it so much that the steel has been hacking through flesh and bone, and therefore it is in fact genuinely, literally warm. Macbeth and Banquo are compared to cannons. That's a military metaphor suggesting that they are powerful, dangerous people. However, you get this hint that perhaps there's too much violence in their soul. They are overcharged and there are double cracks. The idea that if you keep packing ammunition into a cannon, eventually you risk blowing it apart. For this slide, you should have a little think about social context because it ties to the idea of the Scottish rebels. You can see on the screen and you can stick in your book the key ideas that link to treason and the idea of treachery. Now, a quick bit of descriptive writing before we go any further. Under the heading of descriptive writing, use the red sentences to describe the raven. We're now going to have a look at Act 1, Scene 3. Here's your key summary. Macbeth meets the witches. They tell him he's Thane of Glamis, he will be Thane of Cawdor, and he will be king. They tell Banquo that his children will be kings. Before you do, like we did the other day, if you answer these common sense questions in your head, you'll have a better shot at understanding what the text is about. Pause the video, work your way through them, think about them, and then when we read the script, it will make much more sense. Act 1, Scene 3. Follow along as I read. A heath near Forres. Thunder. Enter the 3 witches. Where hast thou been, sister? Killing swine. Sister, where thou? A sailor's wife had chestnuts in her lap, and munched and munched and munched. Give me, quoth I. Aroint thee, witch, the rump-fed Ronion cries. Her husband's to Aleppo gone, master of the Tiger. But in a sieve I'll thither sail, and like a rat without a tail, I'll do, and I'll do. I'll give thee a wind, thou art kind, and I another. I myself have all the other, and the very ports they blow, all the quarters that they know in the shipman's card. I will drain him dry as hay. Sleep shall neither night nor day hang upon his penthouse lid. He shall live a man forbid. Weary 7 nights, 9 times 9, shall he dwindle, peak, and pine. Though his bark cannot be lost, yet it shall be tempest-tossed. Look what I have. Show me, show me. Here I have a pilot's thumb, wrecked as homeward he did come. A drum, Macbeth doth come. The weird sisters hand in hand, posters of the sea and land, thus to go about, thrice to thine, and thrice to mine, and thrice again to make up 9. Peace, the charms wound up. Enter Macbeth and Banquo. So foul and fair a day I have not seen. How far's it called to Forres? What are these, so withered and so wild in their attire, that look not like the inhabitants of the earth, and yet are on it? Live you, or are you aught that man may question? You seem to understand me, by each at once, her chappy finger laying upon her skinny lips. You should be women, and yet your beards forbid me to interpret that you are so. Speak if you can, what are you? All hail, Macbeth! Hail to thee, Thane of Glamis! All hail, Macbeth! Hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor! All hail, Macbeth! Thou shalt be king hereafter. Good sir, why do you start, and seem to fear things that do sound so fair? In the name of truth, are ye fantastical, or that indeed which outwardly ye show? My noble partner you greet with present grace, and great prediction of noble having, and of royal hope, that he seems rapt withal. To me you speak not. If you can look into the seeds of time, and say which grain will grow and which will not, speak then to me, who neither beg nor fear your favours nor your hate. Hail! 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 Lesser than Macbeth and greater. Not so happy, yet much happier. Thou shalt get kings, though thou be none. So all hail, Macbeth and Banquo. Banquo and Macbeth, all hail. Stay, you imperfect speakers, tell me more. By Sinel's death I know I am Thane of Glamis, but how of Cawdor? The Thane of Cawdor lives, a prosperous gentleman, and to be king stands not within the prospect of belief, no more than to be Cawdor. Say from whence you owe this strange intelligence, or why upon this blasted heath you stop our way with such prophetic greeting. Speak, I charge you. The witches vanish. The earth hath bubbles as the water has, and these are of them. Whither are they vanished? Into the air, and what seemed corporal melted as breath into the wind. Would they had stayed! Were such things here as we do speak about, or have we eaten on the insane root that takes the reason prisoner? Your children shall be kings, and you shall be king, and Thane of Cawdor too, went it not so? To the self-saved tune and words, who's here? The king hath happily received, Macbeth, the news of thy success, and when he reads thy personal venture in the rebels' fight, his wonders and his praises do contend which should be thine or his. Silenced with that, in viewing over the rest of the self-same day, he finds thee in the stout Norwegian ranks, nothing afeard of what thyself did make strange images of death. As thick as hail came post with post, and every one did bear thy praises in his kingdom's great defence, and poured them down before him. We are sent to give thee from our royal master thanks, only to herald thee into his sight, not to pay thee. And from an earnest of a greater honour, he bade me from him call thee Thane of Cawdor, in which addition, hail, most worthy Thane, for it is thine. What, can the devil speak true? The Thane of Cawdor lives, why do you dress me in borrowed robes? Who was the Thane lives yet, but under heavy judgment bears that life which he deserves to lose. Whether he was combined with those of Norway, or did line the rebel with hidden help and vantage, or that with both he laboured in his country's wreck, I know not. But treason's capital, confessed and proved, have overthrown him. Glamis and Thane of Cawdor, the greatest is behind. Thank you for your pains. Do you not hope your children shall be kings, when those that gave the Thane of Cawdor to me promised no less to them? That trusted home might yet enkindle you unto the crown beside the Thane of Cawdor, but 'tis strange, and oftentimes to win us to our harm the instruments of darkness tell us truths, win us with honest trifles, to betray us in deepest consequence. Cousins, a word, I pray you. Two truths are told, as happy prologues to the swelling act of the imperial theme. I thank you, gentlemen. Cannot be ill, cannot be good. Why, it has given me earnest of success, commencing in a truth. I am Thane of Cawdor. If good, why do I yield to that suggestion whose horrid image doth unfix my hair, and make my seated heart knock at my ribs against the use of nature? Present fears are less than horrible imaginings. My thought, whose murder yet is but fantastical, shakes so my single state of man, that function is smothered in surmise, and nothing is but what is not. Look how our partner's rapt. If chance will have me king, why, chance may crown me without my stir. New horrors come upon him, like our strange garments, cleave not to their mould, but with the aid of use. Come what come may, time and the hour runs through the roughest day. Worthy Macbeth, we stay upon your leisure. Give me your favour, my dull brain was wrought with things forgotten. Kind gentlemen, your pains are registered where every day I turn the leaf to read them. Let us towards the king, think upon what hath chanced, and at more time the interim having weighed it, let us speak our free hearts to each other. Very gladly. Till then, enough. Come, friends. Time for some notes. Notice again the weather links to the atmosphere. There's a sense of drama, a sense that the heavens and nature are maybe on the side of the witches. This story, with the red bracket around it at the bottom, describes the way the first witch has tormented a sailor because his wife refused to hand over some chestnuts when she asked. She pursues the husband in a sieve all the way to the top of Syria. Okay, now that is a story designed to show the power of the witches and the vengeance. These red bits describe the way they torture the man. In the second red bit that you can see on screen, the witch describes the way that she will take the powers from the man, she will drain him dry as hay, and that she will take sleep off him. Those are important because she uses similar powers, or later on in the play Macbeth is tormented by sleeplessness. So that sense of the witches influencing other people is present here. In the third part, it describes the way his ship, his bark, cannot be lost. This is important because it sets limits on the powers of the witches. They can't kill. They can't intervene directly by hurting other human beings. They can influence and they can shape, but they can't injure. At the bottom of this page that's on the screen now, you will see the repetition of the word thrice. Here you see this sense of magic. What's not clear is whether the witch is doing a charm that links backwards in the scene or forwards in the scene. So when they say peace, the charm's wound up, and in the next line Macbeth enters, you've got the possibility of the witches doing something to influence Macbeth's mind. Is it at this point that the witches take control of his head? We don't know, but the juxtaposition of the two speeches is interesting. Macbeth enters. Banquo is his best friend. Macbeth describes so foul and fair a day. The weather is miserable. The battle has been won, so they're happy. However, on a more metaphorical level, this is a day that changes Macbeth's life. He will have both good news and foul news. So there's a bit of foreshadowing here of what's to come. Then they see the witches. Banquo says, "What are these?" rather than "Who are these?" suggesting they're not human. They are withered and wild. That alliteration is quite harsh and sets up this sense that these things are dangerous and damaging. Wild suggests they're not easily controlled. They look not like the inhabitants of the earth. They are dangerous, alien, something unusual. There's a sense of unnatural, almost deathliness about them. Skinny lips, chappy fingers, and also these beards. So they kind of transgress the normal rules. They don't look living, they don't look appropriately female, but there's also that prejudice against old women that we've talked about with our social context and the witches. The witches deliver 3 prophecies, which are in the red bracket, to Macbeth. He's already Thane of Glamis, so that's his correct title they greet him by, but he isn't Thane of Cawdor yet, so that's a prediction, and telling him that he will be king is also a prediction. Macbeth is obviously shocked. He jumps. Banquo asks him why he starts, and he says he seems to fear things that do sound so fair. Notice we've got that word fair again. The witches have said good things to him, but that Macbeth, quite sensibly, responds fearfully to the idea of witches telling him anything. Banquo, however, wants something for himself. He demands, "Speak then to me, who neither beg nor fear your favours nor your hate." Banquo seems unaffected by the witches. This is the start of Banquo being a good man. Banquo stands separate to Macbeth, who's much more drawn in. The witches in this red bracket here give Banquo 3 predictions. Lesser than Macbeth and greater, not so happy yet much happier, and he will have his children will be kings, though he will not be. Okay? That unfolds later on because Banquo stays a good man while Macbeth becomes more corrupted, and Macbeth ends up dead, whereas Banquo ends up dead but with his morals intact, and his children do become king. Macbeth tries to take control of the situation. You have the imperative verb, stay. However, he still doesn't trust the witches. He calls them imperfect speakers. 1, because they haven't told him what's going on, and 2, because he still doesn't trust them. That adjective has more than one meaning. He demands that they tell him more. That second imperative. We're seeing at this point now that he is much more attracted to the idea of what the witches are telling him than he is worried about them. That's repeated again with the imperative verbs at the end. However, the stage direction where the witches just vanish suggests they're not going to obey him. They're not in his control. In this page, Banquo and Macbeth discuss what's happened. They're amazed, they're confused. Those kinds of ideas are important here. Then Ross enters and suggests that the king is sending good news to Macbeth. Finally, Ross tells him that he will now be called the Thane of Cawdor, because the actual Thane of Cawdor has been condemned as a traitor. This is explained here. Banquo is amazed that the witches have spoken true. He says, "What, can the devil speak true?" He clearly still doesn't trust the witches. Macbeth is more curious about why they've given him the title Thane of Cawdor when the Thane of Cawdor is still alive. Angus tells the story of how the Thane of Cawdor has been a traitor. Cleverly, there's some foreshadowing going on here because Macbeth later on will be a traitor as well. So both Thanes of Cawdor in the play betray their king. Here, Macbeth starts to show secretiveness. He starts to talk differently to different audiences. Notice he talks to 3 different audiences here, and he talks to, when he says to the aside to himself, he's amazed, he's powerful, he's happy. When he talks to Ross and Angus, he's not talking about any of that. He's putting a brave and normal face on it. And to Banquo, he's kind of trying to draw Banquo in. Banquo doesn't trust the witches still. He calls them the instruments of darkness. And he talks about them winning us to our harm, as though they are instruments, kind of tools of the devil, and they're trying to win the souls for the devil. Macbeth is pleased. He's been told 2 truths by the witches, and he calls them happy prologues to the swelling act of the imperial theme. The idea that this is just the start of the journey he's going to be on, and things are going to get better. He has a brief moment of conscience where he says, "If good, why do I yield to that suggestion, whose horrid image doth unfix my hair?" That's the moment where he's thought about killing the king. He's decided, actually, if I murder the king, I can become king. And that's the suggestion he's talking about yielding to. What's not clear is where that suggestion has come from. Is it his own mind, or is it the witches? That noun has more than one meaning. Macbeth seems to suggest chance and luck will be the things that make him king. He's not planning on a murder here, although he was, potentially, 2 or 3 lines earlier. Banquo still treating Macbeth with respect here. Notice those adjectives are still present in this scene.